Chapter 9 of A Diamond in the Rough by a Self-Made Man. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 9, in which Fred is imprisoned in the cellar of the old Dutch mill.
"Now you've done it,"
jeered Mickey Gibbs, who was a thoroughly bad youth from his boots up.
"You've killed him. I didn't think you had the nerve."
"I didn't," protested Moses, his face white with terror. You done it."
"Me?" retorted Mickey with a wicked chuckle. "Ha ha, I like that. Ain't you got the gun in your hand? What done it?"
Moses dropped the revolver as if it were a live coal. "You knocked on my hand and made me do it," gasped Moses, his teeth chattering from fright, while his eyes almost started from their sockets.
"Bah, you make me sick,"
said Mickey.
"If he's dead, you killed him. I can swear to it."
"You won't tell on me, will you?" whimpered Moses. "I'll be sent to jail and hanged."
"What'll I tell on you for? Don't be a fool. I'd only get into trouble myself. Come on, let's look at him."
"I'm afraid. Oh, I hope he ain't dead." Mickey Gibbs looked down on his cowardly associate with the utmost scorn.
"You're a nice one, you are. A little while ago you was just aching for a chance to do 'em, and now you've done it, and you're shivering and shaking like a jellyfish. You give me a pain."
"It's awful to think you've killed a person," wailed Moses in terror. Not that he felt sorry for Fred King, but rather for himself, for he dreaded the consequences of such a deed. Mickey had a more calloused conscience. Besides, he didn't consider himself responsible for the crime. He didn't hold the revolver nor pull the trigger. Leaving Moses to commune with himself, he walked over to the motionless figure that lay in the road and gazed down at it. A thin stream of blood was welling from a slight wound over Fred's ear and running down under his collar.
"I don't believe he's dead for a cent,"
muttered young Gibbs. He bent down and, pulling open the stricken boy's shirt, felt over the region of the heart.
"Nah, it's beaten all right. He ain't dead no more'n me."
He dragged the unconscious boy into the grass to one side and reported the facts to Moses.
"He's only stunned, that's all."
"Are you sure of that?" asked Moses eagerly.
"Sure thing. Go and see for yourself."
It was some moments before Master Wise could muster up the courage to do it. "No, he ain't dead," he said with an air of relief. "It's lucky for me he ain't."
"What are we going to do with him? Leave him here?"
asked Mickey. Moses pondered a moment. "Do you think he's much hurt?" he asked.
"No, he'll come to in a little while."
"And be as good as ever?"
"Sure he will."
This assurance comforted Moses, but in like proportion his hate for Fred King reasserted itself. The boy's death would have been a great satisfaction to him if somebody other than himself was responsible for it. He hated to see his enemy, as he looked upon Fred, escape so easily after all. "Now we've got him dead to rights, we can fix him in another way," he said.
"How?"
inquired Mickey. "Let's carry him down to the Dutch mill."
"What? The old deserted shack?"
"Yep."
"What fer?"
"So's to keep him out of the way. We can tie him in the cellar."
"I guess we can do it. Then we can come back tomorrow with a whip and give him a licking."
The idea of applying a rawhide to the defenseless person of Fred King just suited Moses Wise's idea of retaliation for the whipping Fred had administered to him the night of the fire. So they picked up the unconscious boy between them and started off through the various by-lanes with which they were thoroughly familiar until they came out into the open country south of the village. Over this they progressed slowly, taking frequent rests, until the old Dutch mill, long since out of commission, loomed up before them. The stream which once upon a time had furnished power to turn the rotten moss-grown wheel was now but a mere rivulet, though in spring it expanded to a stream of some size. The base of the structure, comprising the cellar, was constructed of stone, while the 2 stories above were of wood, bearing the stains and scars of many a storm. Moses and Mickey carried their burden into the ground floor, which consisted of one big room, beneath the floor of which ran a stout shaft, to the outside end of which was suspended the water wheel. A trap door at one end led to the depths below.
"He's coming to his senses," said Mickey when they placed Fred upon the floor. "We must get him down below right away."
That the old mill was not unfamiliar as a stamping ground to the young rascals was apparent when Mickey went into a hole in one of the walls and pulled out a lantern and a stout piece of rope, together with a box of matches. He lighted the lantern, then went over and threw up the trap. There was a hook underneath the floor within reach, to which he hung the lantern. Then he and Moses grabbed up their victim again and carried him down into the cellar. They propped him up on a box against a post in the center of the place, to which they tied him as they thought securely. The desire to gloat over the boy they hated induced Mickey to get a pan of water and dash the greater part of it in Fred's face. This produced the desired effect. King opened his eyes with a long-drawn sigh and looked about in a confused way. "Where the dickens am I?" he said loud enough for his two enemies to hear. They chuckled in great glee as they noticed the look of perplexity on his face. Then he became conscious of their presence for the first time, and recognized them even in the dim light furnished by the lantern. "What game are you fellows up to now? Where have you brought me to? You must have knocked me out in some cowardly fashion to get the best of me in this fashion." "We got you where we want you now," said Moses with a triumphant grin. "What do you mean to do? You've tied me so I can't get back at you, you cowards. Well, it's a long lane that hasn't a turning. If you dare to ill-treat me, I'll do you both up worse than I did a month ago." "I don't think," sneered Mickey. "It's our turn now, and Moses is going to make you dance the same music you treated him to. He's going to lick you till your tongue hangs out. The crack over the sconce you gave me, I'll call as square as you got a worse one yourself tonight." Fred was beginning to realize that something was the matter with his head. It throbbed and pained him a good deal. "I suppose you rascals crept up behind me tonight and struck me down," he said angrily, for he entertained a proper contempt for all acts of treachery. "No matter how we done it, you went down all right," jeered Moses. "You two must be fools if you think you can do anything to me and not get it back again with interest." "We'll take our chances of that," grinned Mickey. "You ain't so much after all. I'm going to lick you with a rawhide until I draw blood from you, if I die for it," said Moses with vindictive earnestness. "I hate you worse than anything in the world. If you dare carry out your threat, I promise you I'll make you wish you were dead yourself." The fearless look Fred gave him made him uneasy, and he began to entertain some misgivings as to the ultimate outcome of the affair. He hadn't by any means forgotten the dressing down Fred had given him, and though the thought of it nerved him to revenge, still he shivered to think that he was perhaps inviting a repetition of that punishment. "Don't mind him," said Mickey. "Come along. He won't feel so cocky after he's spent a night in this ranch." Moses was ready to go, so the two boys returned to the floor above, taking the lantern with them, and thus leaving Fred in the darkness of the old mill cellar. End of chapter 9.